I didn't say a word. I didn't slam the door. I just picked up my bag, nodded once, and walked out of that restaurant like I had somewhere better to be. Because I did. That was 8 months ago. And I'm only talking about it now because I finally feel like I can without my hands shaking. My name is Claire. I'm 31 years old. And for 6 years, I built something from absolutely nothing. And then watched the people I love most hand it to someone who had never once believed in me. This is what happened. Growing up, my brother was the one everyone pointed to. Not in a mean way, at least not openly. It was more like gravity, everything just naturally pulled toward him. At the dinner table, the conversation bent in his direction. At family gatherings, relatives would find him first. When something good happened in the house, it somehow became about him too, even when it wasn't. I wasn't invisible exactly, I just wasn't the priority. He was 3 years older than me, and from the time I was old enough to notice, I understood that the rules were slightly different for us. When he wanted to study abroad his junior year, my parents found the money somehow. When I asked if I could do a summer program in Boston for design the following year, my mom said, "We'll see," and we never talked about it again. I used to tell myself it didn't matter, that I'd just work harder, that the gap between what he got and what I got would close eventually because I'd close it myself. And I did. I just didn't expect it to cost me as much as it did. I graduated from Oregon State with a degree in graphic design and a GPA I was proud of, and a portfolio I'd stayed up until 3 in the morning too many nights to count building. I moved to Portland because the rent was slightly less brutal than Seattle, and because I knew one person there, a college friend named Jessie, who said I could crash on her couch for a month while I figured things out. That month turned into 3. 3 turned into 6. But somewhere in there, I started picking up freelance clients. Small stuff at first. A logo for a yoga studio. A rebrand for a bakery that had been using clip art since 2003. Business cards, social media graphics, a landing page here and there. I was charging too little because I didn't know better yet. But I was building something. A client list, a reputation, a rhythm. By the time I got my own apartment, a 340 square foot studio with a radiator that clanged every night at 2 a.m., I had enough recurring work to call it a real income. Not comfortable, not stable, but real. I named my business Clover Creative. I picked it because I'd always drawn clovers in the margins of my notebooks as a kid. 4 petals, equal sides. Something about that felt right. My mom started taking an interest around the time I landed my first mid-sized client, a regional outdoor gear company based in Eugene that wanted a full brand refresh. It was a $12,000 project, the most I'd ever charged for anything. I was terrified and thrilled in equal measure. I told my parents over the phone, and my mom was the first to respond. She said she was proud of me. She asked questions. Real ones, not the polite, disengaged kind she sometimes defaulted to when I talked about work. She wanted to know how I got the client, what the scope was, how I planned to manage it. It felt good, like a door had cracked open that I'd been knocking on for years. Over the following months, she started calling more. We talked about the business, about clients, about where I saw it going. She'd been a bookkeeper for most of her adult life. And she started offering advice about taxes, about expense tracking, about setting up proper accounts. I didn't know how much I needed that until I had it. I want to be careful here because I know how this part of the story sounds, looking back. But at the time, I wasn't being naive. I was just grateful. She was showing up in a way she never really had before, and I chose to believe in it. My mistake was in trusting her. My mistake was not understanding exactly what that trust was built on. The conversation about the LLC happened on a Tuesday afternoon. I was driving back from a client meeting when she called. She said she'd been thinking about the business. She said that if I wanted to grow, I needed proper structure. That operating as a sole proprietor left me exposed, and that forming an LLC was the right move. I already knew that. I'd been meaning to do it for almost a year. Then she said, I was thinking it might make more sense to form it in my name. With my credit history, you'd qualify for better banking terms, better vendor accounts. The business would still be yours. I'd just be the registered owner on paper. I asked if that was common. She said yes. Small business owners did it all the time when one partner had stronger credit. She said we draw up something informal between us so it was clear the business was mine. And then she said, it's just paperwork, honey. Nothing changes. I want to go back to that moment every single time I think about it. I want to reach into it and pull myself out. But I was in the middle of the highway and she was my mother and it was just paperwork. I said, okay. I want to be precise about what the next 3 years look like because I think it matters. I did everything. I brought in every client. I built a portfolio that made new clients say yes. I hired 2 part-time contractors, a copywriter named Beth and a web developer named Priya, and I managed both of them. I set the project rates, I handled revisions, handled scope creep, handled the 11 p.m. emails from clients who suddenly wanted to change the entire color palette 3 days before launch. My mom did the books. She tracked invoices, filed taxes, managed the business account. It was real work and I was genuinely grateful for it. Especially in those early years when I had no idea what I was doing on the financial side. But I want to be absolutely clear. Clover Creative was my idea. My name, my vision, my relationships, and my labor. The clients came to me. The work came from me. Every dollar it earned existed because I had built something worth paying for. By the time the business was 4 years old, we were clearing $800,000 annually. By year 5, we crossed $1.2 million. I had brought on 2 full-time employees. We had retainer clients, a referral pipeline, a reputation in the Pacific Northwest design community that I was genuinely proud of. I was 29 years old and I had built something real. My brother had been living in Phoenix for a few years by then. He'd had a few different jobs, sales, project management, some kind of operations role at a tech startup that folded. Nothing bad, nothing spectacular. He was fine. He was getting by. When he moved back home to Portland, my parents were thrilled. He needed time to figure out his next move and they welcomed him back without a second thought. I wasn't resentful about that. People go through rough patches. I'd had my own. What I didn't know was that the conversations happening in that house were already starting to circle back to me, to my business, to what it was worth and what it could be. The first sign I noticed was small. My mom mentioned in passing that my brother had been asking her questions about Clover Creative, how the billing worked, what the client contracts looked like, whether there was a physical office. I said that was a little odd. She said he was just curious. You know how he is. He gets interested in things. The second sign was when she suggested we have dinner, the 3 of us, plus my dad. Said she wanted to talk about the future of the business, about sustainability. I remember that word specifically because it felt slightly off, like it had been prepared. I drove to their house on a Saturday night thinking we were going to talk about me, maybe hiring a business manager. That I'd walk out with a plan to scale. My dad spoke first, which surprised me. He doesn't usually do that when it comes to my stuff. He said the family wanted to talk about bringing my brother into Clover Creative in a leadership capacity. I kept my face still and asked what that meant. He said my brother had strong operational instincts, that he could help manage the business side while I focused on creative, that it made sense to bring family in when you were at this stage of growth. My mom nodded along to everything he said, and something about the choreography of it, the way they'd clearly rehearsed this, made my stomach drop. I asked where he would fit in the org chart. My dad said he'd come in as a co-director, 50-50. I said, this is my business. I own it. There was a pause, and then my mom said quietly, well, the LLC is in my name, honey, so technically it's mine to make decisions about. She said it gently, not cruelly, almost apologetically, but the words were a door slamming shut. I understood then what the last 3 years had actually been. I didn't explode. I want to be clear about that because I think people expect you to explode in moments like this. And when you don't, it sometimes reads as weakness. It wasn't. I sat there for a moment. I looked at my mom, then at my dad, then at my brother, who had the sense to at least look slightly uncomfortable. I said, I need to think about this. My dad said there wasn't really anything to think about, that the decision had been made, that they were telling me out of respect. My brother said, and this is the part that I think about most. He said, it's not like I'm taking anything from you. You'd still be the creative lead. This would actually free you up. I picked up my water glass, set it back down, picked up my bag, stood up. My mom said, Claire, don't make this dramatic. I said, I'm not. And I walked out. I spent that night at Jessie's. I didn't sleep. I lay on her couch with my phone face down on the coffee table and stared at the ceiling for most of it, running through everything in my head. The timeline, the documents, the conversations I thought I'd understood and apparently hadn't. In the morning, I called a lawyer. She confirmed what I already knew by then. The LLC was in my mother's name. The informal understanding between us, the thing my mom had called just paperwork, had no legal weight. The business account, the contracts, the client relationships that ran through those documents, all of it technically sat under my mother's ownership. I asked what my options were. She walked me through them. It would be a fight. Not impossible, but expensive and slow and the kind of thing that poisons whatever family relationship remains on the other side of it. I sat with that for 2 weeks. I kept working because the clients deserved that and because stopping would have made me disappear. I answered emails and delivered projects and showed up on calls and did it all while feeling like the floor had been removed from under me. And then I made a decision. I would not fight for Clover Creative. Not because I didn't have grounds, not because I wasn't furious, but because the thing I had actually built wasn't the LLC. It wasn't the name on a registration document. It was the relationships, the reputation. The 6 years of work that made clients trust me specifically, not some entity registered in my mother's name. I took those with me. I reached out to every client personally. I explained that I was transitioning out of Clover Creative and launching a new studio. Every single one of them followed me. Everyone. Because they hadn't hired Clover Creative. They had hired me. I called my new studio Fieldstone Studio. I registered it myself under my own name, with my own credit, with help from my lawyer to make sure every document was exactly what I needed it to be. I did not tell my family I was doing this. I just did it. The timeline of what happened to Clover Creative after I left is not something I watched directly. I heard it through mutual contacts, through a former client who called me confused, through a mention in a design community group I'm part of. My brother lasted less than 4 months. He lost 2 anchor clients in the first 6 weeks because he didn't know what they actually needed. He'd never been in a client meeting, never learned the language of the work, never understood that the relationship was the product. He underbid a major project, and when he tried to correct it mid-contract, the client walked. Beth quit in month 2. Priya lasted a little longer but was gone by month 3. By the time my mom called me, Clover Creative had active contracts it couldn't fulfill, 2 outstanding invoices it couldn't collect because the relationships had broken down, and a reputation in the local market that was no longer clean. She said, "We need to talk." I said, "About what?" She said things hadn't gone the way they expected. That my brother was struggling, that they wanted to know if I would consider coming back. As a consultant maybe, someone who could help stabilize things. I asked, in what capacity? She said, possibly reporting to my brother in the short term, just until he found his footing. I held the phone for a moment. I thought about 6 years, about the client in Eugene, about the 2 a.m. emails, about the studio apartment with the clanging radiator where I drew 4-leaf clovers in the margins of proposal documents, about every single thing I had built that now sat attached to someone else's name. I said, "I appreciate you calling, but I'm going to pass." She started to say something. I said, "I really do have to go. Take care of yourself." And I ended the call. My dad called 2 days later. He had a different approach, less apologetic, more practical. He said I was being emotional. He said I was letting pride get in the way of what could still be a good situation for me. He said family should be able to work through things like this. I let him finish. Then I said, Dad, I love you. And I'm not coming back. I hope things work out. He called me stubborn. I said, probably. My brother sent a text about a week after that. It said he was sorry for how things had gone down, that he hadn't realized how much he was stepping into, that he hoped we could talk. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty. There was just nothing there for me anymore. Fieldstone Studio just crossed $900,000 in revenue in its first full operating year. We have 4 full-time employees, a creative director I hired 6 months in, who has made everything better, and a client list that I am genuinely proud of. I'm not telling you that to brag. I'm telling you because I think people need to hear that the ending isn't always dramatic. There wasn't a courtroom. There wasn't a confrontation where I said everything I needed to say in exactly the right way. There was just me, choosing to build again, and the second time, I built it right. Every contract goes through my lawyer now. Every partnership is documented. Every piece of paper that touches this business has my name on it and my signature next to language I actually read and understood before I signed. That's the thing no one tells you about trust. It's not a character flaw to give it. But you are allowed to learn from what happens when it's taken advantage of. You are allowed to restructure. The hardest part, if I'm being honest, wasn't the business. I rebuilt that. It took time, but I knew how because I'd done it before. The hardest part was the grief. Because there was grief. The relationship I thought I had with my mom. The one where she was finally showing up, finally interested, finally proud of me, turned out to have been something different than I understood it to be. And letting go of the version of that relationship I had believed in was quieter and slower and lonelier than losing the business. I don't talk to my mom much now. We see each other at the occasional holiday, and we are polite and we do not discuss Clover Creative or Fieldstone or any of it. Sometimes she looks at me like she wants to say something. I let her look. She doesn't say it. My brother, I understand, is doing something in sales again. I hope he's okay. I genuinely do. I just don't have space for him in my life right now, and maybe not ever, and I've made peace with that taking however long it takes. Here's the thing I want to say to whoever is watching this because something similar happened to you. Your name doesn't have to be on the building to be the reason it stands. The work is yours. The skill is yours. The relationships that matter will follow you, not the paperwork. And if you're building something right now, with family, with a partner, with anyone you love, please get a lawyer. Read the documents. Sign nothing because someone you trust calls it just paperwork. Especially then. Especially when it's someone you trust. I don't say that bitterly. I say it because I learned it the hardest way I know. And I came out the other side, and it's the truest thing I can hand you. You are not the name on the LLC. You are not the logo or the office or the client list. You are the reason any of it worked in the first place. Don't let anyone take that from you. And if they try, build again, bigger, with your name on every single page. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, not to pick it apart the way I used to, turning it over in the middle of the night, looking for the exact moment I should have seen it coming. I'm past that now. But I do think about cause and effect a lot. About how the things people do, even slowly, even quietly, eventually land somewhere. They always do. My mom didn't make one big decision. She made 100 small ones over years. Every time she let me believe the business was mine while keeping the paperwork in her name, that was a choice. Every time she let me handle a difficult client and then fires the tax return under her signature, that was a choice. And every time she nodded along to my plans without ever saying, actually, I want to revisit the ownership structure, that was a choice too. None of it was an accident. I don't think she's a villain. But I also can't pretend it was careless. What I know now is that the way you treat someone's work tells them exactly what you think of them. And what my family communicated through years of small choices was that my effort was something to be redirected when it became convenient. That's the thing about integrity. You can't fake it indefinitely. Sooner or later, the gap between what you say and what you do becomes impossible to paper over. My brother didn't fail because he was stupid. He failed because he tried to run something he hadn't earned the right to understand. There's a kind of intelligence that only comes from doing the work yourself, from losing a client and learning why, from getting a scope wrong and fixing it at your own expense, from staying up until 2 in the morning because someone is counting on you and you said you'd deliver. You can't inherit that. You can't be handed it at a dinner table. He walked into Clover Creative thinking the business was a machine someone else had built, and all he had to do was operate it. It isn't. It never was. It was relationships and reputation and trust, and those things belong to the person who built them. What I'm most proud of, more than Fieldstone, more than the revenue, more than any of it, is that I didn't let what happened make me smaller. That was the real risk. Not the money, not the legal situation. The real risk was that I would walk away from that dinner table and decide it wasn't worth trying again. That the lesson was don't build things instead of build things with your name on every page. I chose to build again, smarter, with a lawyer I trust and contracts I actually read, and a business that is mine in every sense of the word, legally, creatively, completely. If you're in the middle of something like this right now, I'm not going to tell you it's easy. It isn't. Rebuilding after betrayal, especially family betrayal, takes something out of you that doesn't come back the same way. But I think that's okay. You come back different, more clear eyed, more precise about who you let close to the things you care about. That's not hardness, that's wisdom. And there's a difference. Claire built Fieldstone from scratch the second time, knowing exactly what she was doing and why. I hope you get to do the same.